your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, a third survivor has quit her role on the national inquiry into grooming gangs. Hannah, which is not her real name, says there is still a lack of understanding into the scandal. Rotherham child abuse and grooming survivor Sammy Woodhouse has told LBC she's not surprised by the criticism.
There's also the race and religion factor to this, and the fact that it's been covered up because majority of perpetrators were Pakistani or Muslim men. I can't see any government, not just a Labour government, but I can't see anyone, really wanting to tackle that head on.
The government says claims it's diluting the review are false. The Chancellor has told LBC there is no recession on the horizon, despite warnings from prominent economists. It says government borrowing rose by £20 billion last month. MPs could investigate the handling of Prince Andrew's residence on the Windsor estate. He's facing growing pressure to give up the 30-room mansion following fresh allegations from Virginia Giuffre. Andrew denies wrongdoing. And heavy downpours and winds of up to 75 miles per hour are set to hit parts of the UK later this week. Yellow Met Office alerts covering London, the South Midlands and eastern parts come in on Thursday. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 23 points at 94.26. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.15. LBC weather, showers easing for many this evening, a few lingering along western coasts and in the far north, lows of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Something is changing in the atmosphere around how we treat each other. What you can say, what you can't say, and when the law steps in. This is either a great day for free speech, or it's the British establishment knuckling under to right-wing criticism. 2 stories. First, after Graham Linehan, the Irish comic writer, was told he wouldn't be facing any charges after his arrest at Heathrow over social media posts about trans rights, the Met says it will stop investigating non-crime hate incidents. That's when one person's actions or words are perceived to be motivated by hostility or prejudice to a particular group. In plain terms, we're talking about coppers at the front door first thing in the morning after a teenage tweet they have been told upsets somebody. Now, if this is stopping, it is a big moment. It's the police, not the politicians, who've made the change. The Met Commissioner says he doesn't think his officers should be policing toxic culture war debates. But we know the police always alert to a nod from above. Second story, and this does involve the government directly. Ministers are no longer going to propose a new definition of Islamophobia, which many people think would become a backdoor blasphemy law. Again, this is a moment. If you hate Muslims and you want them attacked, then that is incitement to violence and the common law will come for you. But this was different. This was an attempt to stifle criticism of Islam. If so, why stop there? Why not ban criticism of Christianity or Hinduism or paganism? In a free country, I think all religions, including Islam, should be fair targets for criticism. The government hasn't actually announced it's dropping Islamophobia. That has emerged through leaks and mutterings, presumably because ministers don't want to make a statement saying, "We were thinking of doing this really stupid thing, but good news, folks, we have decided not to do this really stupid thing." Nevertheless, as with non-crime hate incidents, this is a moment in the culture of modern Britain. Many people will applaud and say it's a return to common sense. Others may be horrified. Let's hear first from Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, the former minister and co-chair of the Conservative Party, who resigned from the cabinet 11 years ago over Gaza and left the Conservative Party itself last year. Baroness Warsi, wonderful to have you on the show. First of all, if it's as reported that the government has dropped its idea of a specific definition of Islamophobia on the way to a blasphemy law, is that a good thing in your view or a bad thing?
It's so much more nuanced than that, Andrew. First of all, there is nobody, as far as I'm aware, that has worked on dealing with anti-Muslim racism, Islamophobia, anti-Muslim intolerance, anti-Muslim hatred, call it what you want. There is nobody who actually wants a blasphemy law, if for no other reason, but because Muslims, for example, don't believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And therefore, if we were to have a blasphemy law, then there would be many, there'd be many Muslims in the dock. And also in this country, we have a great tradition of freedom of speech and freedom of thought and freedom of expression. And I don't think that there is anybody who's been involved in this work, including myself, who would want to curtail that in any way. I think the work on anti-Muslim racism, Islamophobia, like I said, call it what you want, call it pink bananas. I think what it means in the end is that we think that there should be a non-legally binding working definition. So this is not a definition in law, just like the anti-Semitism definition is not a definition in law, but it provides a scope within which you can do policy work. And I don't think there'd be anybody who would argue that we shouldn't have a definition of anti-Semitism, which we have now had for many, many years on the books and used as a tool to make policy. And I therefore can't understand why anybody is saying we shouldn't have a definition for anti-Muslim racism.
But to be absolutely clear, you would say that the ability of individuals to criticize Islam as a religion, however offensive and painful that might be to believing Muslims, should be part of our culture.
It always has been. And of course, at the moment, Andrew, we have a two-tier system in this country. We have one tier which protects Jewish and Sikh communities, both on a religious and a racial basis. And we have a second tier where Muslims and Christians are only protected on a religious basis, but not on are protected if they are subjected to racial attacks, but they are only defined as a religious community. So if you said certain things about Judaism and Jews and certain things about Sikhism and Sikhs, there would be potential criminal prosecutions. You could say exactly the same things about Islam and Muslims, and there would not be, because that group is not seen as a racialized group in the way that Jews and Sikhs are seen.
Isn't that the problem? That we've raised, as it were, some groups, you say Sikhs and Jews above other groups. And actually, we all need to be the same. We all need to be on the same level. And that therefore, the common law is enough. The common law says that, if I criticize any group, a religious group or other group, in a way that incites violence, I can be prosecuted for that. Isn't that enough?
I agree with you that in this country, we have a great tradition of the rule of law and everybody being equal before the law and all communities being equal before the law. And you can either say that we need to reduce the status of Jewish and Sikh communities to bring them in line with the rest of the communities, or you have to say that we have to raise the status of Christians and Hindus and Muslims to bring them in line with Sikh and Jewish communities, because we cannot have a two-tier system where some communities are protected racially and religiously, but other communities are not.
I know that she is probably the most senior Muslim politician in the country, not just now, but for a very long time. But Shabana Mahmood, the new Home Secretary, seems to be flexing her muscles a bit on this. Are you pleased that she is being more outspoken or more robust than predecessors?
I don't think this is an issue which should be laid at the door of Shabana Mahmood, or even whether she is or she isn't flexing. I think ultimately that, it is when straight people advocate for gay rights, it is when Christians and Muslims advocate for Jewish rights, and it is when people of no faith and other faiths advocate for Muslims that we end up with genuine, true equality.
Well
and I
said.
genuinely want the Prime Minister to lead on this, because this is a community of 4 to 5 million facing the most appalling attacks, 26 separate incidents simply in the last couple of weeks in relation to mosques being attacked. And it is right for the Prime Minister to say that all communities in this country deserve protection, and that includes British Muslims.
What do you think is going on at the moment? Because there has been a great rise in attacks. There's a great online hostility to Muslims right across the West, not just in Britain. And that seems to me to be around a small number, perhaps, of imams who are saying, actually, we should convert everybody we want to take over those countries, and that being taken as a general Muslim view. What do you think is going on?
So that in itself is a view which I think is inward-looking and would be defined as something which is defining a whole community through the actions of a few. If somebody who happened to be Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh, an individual, did something that was appalling, or their religious leaders did something that was appalling, I would not superimpose that on the whole community. For example, when you hear extremist Jewish settlers using the language and the kind of incitement to hatred that we have seen in recent years, I do not superimpose that on the whole of the Jewish community across the world. So it's when you stigmatize, stereotype, demonize, and place tropes on a whole community, that in itself is the kind of challenges that we need to stop.
And do you think the mood is darkening, or has been darkening, towards Muslims recently? I mean, just today, Robert Jenrick from your old party said he would consider banning the burqa if he was in power. Do you think the mood is darkening quite fast?
I think the mood has been darkening for many, many years, Andrew. When I first spoke about this in 2011, I said that Islamophobia had passed the dinner table test. I said that this form of racism was unfortunately Britain's bigotry blind spot, the last form of acceptable form of bigotry, and something that was found in the dinner tables and dining rooms of respectable society. It's found in editorial newsrooms. It's found tragically on the floor of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And we have to be able to say that in this country, people are of equal worth and value. It cannot be that 70 years, Andrew, after my, in-country relationship with Britain, having had a grandfather, maternal and paternal, who'd served in the British Indian Army, having served my country at the cabinet table, and my child now back in our armed forces serving this country, we cannot be saying to this country and people like me and our families who have served this country loyally for generations that this is a country that will fail to protect you as equal citizens.
And just directly, what do you think about a man who might well be the next leader of your old party, Robert Jenrick, saying he wants to ban the burqa? What do you think about that?
I don't really think about what Robert normally says. I think Robert needs to think more about what he says.
Baroness Warsi, very, very succinctly put. Thank you so much for that. Now, listening to that was Lord Jonathan Sumption, the former Supreme Court. Welcome, Lord Sumption. First of all, what do you make of this shift in what the government seems to be doing around Islamophobia? Do you welcome it?
Well, I agree with pretty well everything that Baroness Warsi has said, and I don't think that I can really sensibly add anything.
Well, in that case, let's not ask you to do that, and let's move on to the shift on non-crime hate incidents, because after the Graham Linehan arrest and all the publicity around that, it does seem that the Met Police in particular have said, we are not getting involved in this anymore. Do you welcome that?
Yes, I do. And I think that it's about time that other police forces took the same line. The problem about non-crime hate incidents is that there is absolutely no statutory basis for this at all. It is simply an administrative procedure which the police have adopted. And I think that that is not consistent with the rule of law. What makes it worse is that the Director of Public Prosecutions and the police have agreed a definition which makes a non-crime hate incident dependent entirely on what the complainant thinks.
Yes, this word perception,
outrage.
Perception yes. of a hostility or a dislike.
Indeed, and indeed, before the definition was shortened quite recently, the definition actually contained a sentence which said that policemen should not inquire whether there is any objective basis for the complaint. I mean, that really is an appalling state of affairs. Remember that non-crime hate incidents, when they're recorded, can appear on an enhanced criminal record check. It can damage people's jobs. It can also lead to harassment and to extremely intimidating encounters like the one which at Heathrow Airport Gary Linehan had.
Well, many of us have seen many other examples of that kind of thing online, videos of police arriving at doors and being extremely aggressive about it. Do you think that this particular procedure has put the law under ridicule, made the law ridiculous in many people's eyes?
I think that it has made the police ridiculous. It's hard to say that it's discredited the law because the law never created this species of police activity. I mean, the law is tolerably clear. It basically attacks those who use their rights of free speech to incite violence, and it serves as an aggravating factor for criminal offences. If a criminal offence is committed for racially motivated reasons, you may get a larger sentence. I've got no problem about either of those, and they're both embodied in statutes. But non-crime hate incidents are something which is really quite inconsistent with the rule of law.
So there is a piece of good news, as it were, this shift of position by the Met Police, at least. I'm sorry to dart around from subject to subject, but I have a great legal brain in front of me, so I must ask you also about what appears to be a growing argument going on between the Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood, I was mentioning her just now, and the European Commission on Human Rights, who have intervened to say that the government's ban on Palestine action is ridiculous or wrong, and also that it doesn't like what the government's saying, or the British courts have been saying on trans rights. This seems to be quite a significant shift from the government. They are taking on the ECHR in a way I haven't seen for a while.
No, that is true. And I think that there is a growing tide of opinion among people who previously supported our participation in the ECHR, who now have strong reservations or have come out as out-and-out opponents of it. I think this is a movement that we need to take seriously.
Lord Sumption, fantastic to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Brexit has been brought back to the heart of politics by the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who's preparing the nation for a bitter pill in her upcoming budget. More on that next. But the time now, 6:16.
This is LBC.
Mickey could try to sell his car privately. Or get it sold today with We Buy Any Car. He could spend days on end trying to sell to a bunch of time wasters. Or sell in a flash and head to the fun fair with the kids. Proper gutted. Or proper impressed. To get a quote in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at WeBuyAnyCar.com.
I'm telling you, raise taxes, that's how.
Cut spending, less waste, more sense.
Move north, get more for your money.
Until winter hits your heating bill.
Fair.
Up to 9.13% annual return. We all agree that's strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's hard to ignore.
Cufflink. Auto-invest property backed from £500. Visit cufflink.com. That's Kufflink. Register your interest today. Your capital is at risk. Tax rules apply to IF ISAs and may be subject to change. Cufflink is authorised and regulated by the FCA.
Train to 3 bridges for 2 adults, 1 skeleton and 1 fairy werewolf, as you do.
Just 1 pumpkin each, kids! Charlie, not that one, mate. It's nearly as big as you.
Back on the train with 2 little monsters and a couple of pumpkins. Now off home to spend a good 3 hours carving. Download the Thameslink Railway app to book kids' tickets for £2 on off-peak journeys. Thameslink Railway, where every stop is a story.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:18. So, funny how things change. For an awful long time after the referendum, Brexit was a word Labour didn't even want to say out loud. So worried about allegations they wanted to reverse it, they simply couldn't bring themselves to mention the word at all. Didn't appear in Keir Starmer's speeches, didn't appear when Rachel Reeves was talking about the economy. Now, screech of brakes, they seem to have decided ahead of the budget they need to talk about Brexit all the time. Brexit damaged the economy. Farage and Brexit. Brexit, Brexit, Brexit. Is this very shrewd or very silly? Let's talk now to LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Shawbury. It's certainly everywhere again, isn't it?
It's certainly everywhere. And it really depends who you talk about, whether they say that it's shrewd or whether it's very silly. But Rachel Reeves today was speaking to an audience of 350 business leaders, regional mayors and investors. And she said, we know that things like austerity, cuts to capital spending and Brexit have had a bigger impact on our economy than was even projected back then. And basically, I was speaking to the Treasury, they were suggesting, look, she's trying to paint a diagnosis of why we've had such poor growth, why we've had poor economic results. They would say she's not blaming anyone, or although it sounds an awful lot like she's blaming Brexit.
She's blaming the lost lot, isn't she?
Well, yes, but they say she wants to be the one to find a solution. So lots of people I've spoken to suggest this is a risk. They think it's a risk that at the moment they have to take, but they say that there is a danger as well that you put Brexit back up the agenda. And of course, as you said in your introduction, the question after blaming Brexit, or as close to blaming Brexit as I think you can get, tends to be, well, OK, are you going to relitigate it? Is there going to be a second referendum? To which the answer that I've had today is no. Not necessarily because they don't want to, but because they think that that wouldn't work for the economics. They think that is just not a realistic possibility at all. Lots of people suggesting that it is true and that they think that actually they should have started blaming Brexit earlier. Of course, this is all in the run-up to the budget. They've got just weeks left before the budget. And that, people think this is an attempt to get away as much as they can and paint the picture for the tax rises that I think everyone believes are inevitable.
They're softening us up. But going back to what you're saying, this really interesting question. OK, so Brexit's a problem. It has subdued growth or damped down growth even more than expected for quite a while. And this is all, as far as I can tell, pretty much true. But what do you then do about it? Even if you don't go back into the EU, do you try and go back into the single market where we would then be rule takers, not involved in setting the rules, and just accept that as a price? I think that would be pretty unpopular around the country.
I think that would be unpopular, but it is interesting looking at what pollsters say. So, for example, Anthony Wells from YouGov has said Brexit is widely seen as being bad for the economy, bad for public finances. So at least they're travelling with public opinion, and blaming Brexit may well sound a little less self-serving than trying to blame the other side.
And that is more or less what the polling is showing?
That's more or less what the polling is showing too. So I think that is the reason that they are doing it. And one person I was speaking to in government was basically suggesting they think this is very shrewd politics, because they say when you get to the next general election, Nigel Farage will have to make a choice. Does he want trade deals with Europe, or does he want to end those and potentially make the economy worse? So I think they are trying as much as they can to set traps as well for Reform UK ahead of the next election. This all comes, Andrew, as well as the Chancellor told LBC today that there is no recession on the horizon, despite all of those economic warnings from the Bank of England and the IMF.
Which suggests perhaps that she is getting slightly more upbeat or optimistic private messaging from the various bodies that we've heard so far in public. What else is she saying?
Well, she basically said that she wants to unashamedly rebuild relations with the EU to reduce some of the costs that she was talking about earlier. But it was really interesting when I was phoning around people today, basically saying, do you think this is going to work? Do you think this is a good political strategy? And a lot of people were basically saying it's true. It's potentially come too late, and said that now, until the budget, what Rachel Reeves and the Prime Minister and everybody else in the cabinet needs to do is just unashamedly say this over and over and over again and try and blame Brexit as much as possible so that it sticks. Exactly.
And I gather she was fairly salty about Prince Andrew as well.
She was indeed fairly salty about Prince Andrew. So lots of government ministers being asked about what they make of Prince Andrew. And she basically said today, when asked whether or not Prince Andrew should have paid rent, of course, he's just been paying a peppercorn, basically said, she thinks everybody should pay their way. So very strong language there from the Chancellor today on that.
Great clarity on that, Aggie. Thank you very much indeed. And we may pick up on that story again. Meanwhile, it goes on. Overnight, Russian drones hit Ukraine, destroying buildings, killing people. But President Trump's gone back to bullying Ukraine's President Zelensky, telling him that his country will be destroyed unless he agrees to hand over more land to Putin. Our Defence Secretary John Healey said earlier today that Britain was prepared to spend more than £100 million to deploy troops to Ukraine if there was a peace deal. Well, at the moment, giant-sized if. I'm joined now by Lord Simon McDonald, the former head of the Foreign Office. And let's just pick up from there. The latest news is that Donald Trump is now saying that his great one-to-one with President Putin in Budapest may not go ahead, or at least there are no plans for that. Do you think he has been played by Putin, and do you think he's beginning to recognise that?
It's déjà vu all over again. I think, yes, he has been played by President Putin, but as this happens again, I hope that he's seeing that. And so when it happens another time, his reaction will be more subtle than it has been the last three times.
Because he moved from saying that he thought Ukraine could win the war and take back all its territory, and that he might give Ukraine Tomahawk missiles, to exactly the reverse position within a day or two.
Indeed. And what seems to happen is that Ukraine has a good day, a good few days. Moscow, particularly Putin, spots that, doesn't like that, and reacts. So last week, all the talk was about the supply of Tomahawk missiles. Tomahawk comes in various different varieties. The ones under discussion could have hit Moscow and St. Petersburg. Putin really didn't want that. So he got on the phone to President Trump and worked the magic he's worked several times before.
Made nice. What's your assessment at the moment of the European determination to back Ukraine? Because that's the other part of the picture.
I think that too has been pretty consistent. When Ukraine suffers a reverse in Washington, the rest of Europe gets together to back Ukraine, and that has happened again. So leading EU countries plus the United Kingdom restate the completeness of their support for Kyiv and hope that Washington notices.
And what's your assessment of where we are actually in the war at the moment? I read earlier today that the assessment is 100,000 Russian troops have been killed, not injured, but killed this year alone, and that Putin is beginning to have some difficulties about recruiting enough to keep resupplying his army. But what's your assessment of...
The latest figures are that 1 in 27 Russian men have been enlisted. So this is a huge part of the population. In 3.5 years, they've suffered over 1 million casualties, killed or injured. The rate right now is about 1,000 casualties, so killed and injured per day, for very little gain territorially. They are making some gains, but not sufficient to be to justify that level of bloodletting. Russia has shown immense resilience. Nobody can see when that will come to an end, but surely it will. No country can withstand that level of casualty indefinitely.
So this is much, much greater than the war in Afghanistan for the Russians.
Correct.
And we have seen maybe quite small but quite vocal anti-Putin protests starting to take place.
Mr. Putin has his country under control. And that historically is the case all the way until the moment the leader loses control. So that must be on his mind as well. But at the moment, I don't think he's worried about the domestic front.
Let me ask you, I was just discussing with Aggie just now, this use of Brexit by the government. Is it your sense that the mood in the country towards Europe has changed enough for the government to be a little bit bolder on the subject, or would you advise caution?
I would say it takes two to tango. Changing our mind about Brexit has to be synchronised with Brussels changing its mind. So we may be in the early days of putting out more positive feelers, but I do not think this government will go very far or should go very far unless it's certain of a positive reaction in Brussels.
And not much sign of that so far. I think you were probably in post in the Foreign Office when Prince Andrew was over in China and declined the offer to stay in British embassies and bought very, very expensive hotel suites instead, presumably on the taxpayers' money. I mean, 50,000 quid or so is being talked about as the cost of accommodating him in hotels. What's your feeling about that?
I can't comment on that. I don't know the detail. But all I would say, Andrew, is that when someone falls, and Prince Andrew has fallen hard and completely, there is a tendency to think that nothing that person did was any good. The prince was a demanding trade envoy for sure, but he was effective. He had the best access, and he worked pretty hard. So whilst I can't comment on the detail, I think we shouldn't lose sight that over his long public service, he did achieve something.
That's very interesting. Let's just circle round to where we started then, and Ukraine again. John Healey said that we're prepared to spend a lot of money putting in peacekeeping forces into Ukraine if there is a peace deal. Now, we both know a peace deal for the time being seems very unlikely indeed. Nonetheless, given that President Putin has been absolutely clear he would not accept, or he would not want or allow, or whatever, Western European troops inside Ukraine, do you think this whole thing is a complete non-starter?
I think it's going to be part of a negotiation. Clearly, President Putin does not want this. It is very easy to understand why he doesn't want it. But although in detail things are going Russia's way on the ground, the bigger picture is still not going Russia's way. So at some point, President Putin may have to accept things that right now he can't imagine himself accepting.
And in the meantime, we will have to accept continued sort of grey war attacks, drones appearing in strange places, perhaps important undersea cables being snipped and the rest of it. It's going to be an uncomfortable period ahead.
But I think NATO will push back. So after drones appeared over Poland, the Polish shot them down.
Yeah.
And I think that
would be... And the Poles are now saying that if President Putin flew across Poland to his meeting with Trump in Budapest, they would force his plane down and arrest him as a war criminal.
I think the sequencing of announcements would be worth exploring. If it was after the announcement of the postponement, maybe that's not so muscular on the part of Warsaw.
Lord McDonald, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming in. Now, today, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was called to give evidence on his decision-making about school closures during the COVID pandemic. What can we learn from the government's mistakes? The time now, 6:30, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The government has rejected allegations a national inquiry into grooming gangs is being diluted after 3 survivors quit their roles on the panel. Jess Phillips has told MPs the review remains laser-focused despite heavy criticism. The Chancellor has insisted there is no recession on the horizon following warnings from economists. There has been speculation that Rachel Reeves is preparing to announce a blitz of tax increases and cuts to spending at the budget next month. And the White House says it has halted work on a summit between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. It follows reports the US president had suggested Ukraine should surrender the entire eastern Donbass region last week. LBC weather, showers easing for many this evening, a few lingering along western coasts and in the far north, lows of 3 degrees.
On the latest episode of The Newsagents,
we have Virginia Giuffre's friend and co-author Amy Wallace telling us why she thinks the paedophile ring cover-up could yet be exposed. That's all for free on the Global Player app.
Get the latest episode of The Newsagents with Emily Maitlis, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Listen or watch on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app.
Step aboard the legend of the Titanic, London's award-winning exhibition devoted to the world's most famous ocean liner at DockX Canada Water. Walk her decks, explore her cabins, discover her secrets. With 360-degree projections, VR, an interactive metaverse, artifacts and more. Book your tickets today at legendoftitanic.com.
So, what's on your to-do list today? Why don't you check if you're eligible for pension credit? It tops up your pension income and also opens up help with heating bills, council tax and more. Search pension credit on gov.uk or call 0800 99 1234. There's nothing to lose. Check today. Pension credit. Credit where credit's due. Eligibility criteria apply.
Tonight's Euro Millions jackpot is £34 million. I think that deserves a whoop whoop. Whoop whoop! Thank you, faraway person. Get in tonight's Euro Millions draw. Play on app.
Estimated jackpot. Account terms, rules and procedures apply. Players must be 18 or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:33. Boris Johnson, remember him? Has been giving evidence at the COVID inquiry today about the impact of the lockdown on Britain's children. We know it was very severe, and the damage has been emerging in all sorts of ways, from kids failing to turn up to school afterwards to widespread mental health problems, depression, stress. Here is the former Prime Minister reacting to what his government did.
After the first lockdown, I went to see a school in I saw several, but I remember going to one in Kent and talking to the kids. It was obvious that some had been fine, and some had been very far from fine. And I'd say the most had been fine, but a significant number of kids were very badly affected by this thing, and it was very difficult to remediate.
Now, one of the biggest problems was over the exam grades passed down to students unable to take exams in real life. They were lower than many expected, and Johnson said he regretted that very much. Let's hear now from Zenna Hopson, who is the former chair of Ofsted. Zenna, thank you so much for coming in. Do you think a cohort of children was, as it were, robbed of the exam grades they would have got had the COVID pandemic never happened?
Absolutely. I mean, they were robbed of so much more than that as well. But the problem was that there was a lot, you talked to a lot of school leaders, you talked to a lot of people in education at the time, as they were preparing to decide how to assess the GCSE and A-level grades. And there was a lot of talk about not doing down the moderation algorithm, if you want to call it that. And that still went ahead. And that devastated young people, had to be withdrawn. We had to go to centre-assessed exams. And it was just a part of the whole problem of not listening, of not having a strategy, of not being inclusive, and frankly, lurching from one crisis with young people to another.
We've seen some pretty fruity WhatsApp messages between Boris Johnson and Number 10, talking about the education department in particular, under Gavin Williamson at the time. He was clearly outraged and at one point absolutely furious about what was going on. In your view, was the Department of Education working properly?
In my view, in my opinion, the leadership at the very top, the Secretary of State, Gavin Williamson, completely failed. I think he failed his civil servants as well as failed young people. The direction of the department was entirely wrong. At no point was there a stop, let's take a holistic view, let's work out what young people need, let's get a strategy for young people. It simply lurched from one crisis to another. Whenever anything went wrong, it was a real blame culture. Shove it down, blame people, take no responsibility, sloping shoulders.
That is really, really interesting, because clearly, nobody had hindsight at the time. It was a really difficult situation. People were making judgments based on imperfect information. Nonetheless, if that part of government had been working more effectively, had been more decisive, then a lot of the damage to children that happened because of the pandemic might not have been so serious.
I think so. And I think also it's a national government level as well, that there was never any real effort on thinking about a strategy for children and young people throughout the pandemic. They'd been really hard hit by years of austerity. 70% of youth services already gone, and still no thought. And every time people tried to take a holistic look, it was stopped and everything was done in a really reactive way. And there seemed to be a real lack of proper communication between Number 10, between the Cabinet Office and between the Department for Education, which left young people hanging.
Zenna, at the beginning I mentioned all the different ways in which we could see that young people had been damaged by the lockdown, including the increase in mental health problems and the increase in absenteeism from schools. What's your overall view of what happened to that cohort of people?
I think that during the pandemic and the lack of attention to a fulsome recovery plan that was proposed, Kevin did propose a very good recovery plan. That lack of attention to young people is almost criminal. They have been left utterly devastated. And that's at every level. And you have to see that in the context of the rise of social media, which they've got access to without a driving licence. They can use whatever they want. And isolation. They have been left feeling vulnerable, uncared for, and as an afterthought in society.
So these are, as it were, social and perhaps even political problems that have been fed into the system and we're living with today.
We're living with today, and we're expecting our young people to live with, still without a very good, robust strategy for youth, for children and young people.
Absolutely fascinating. Zenna Hopson, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me.
My pleasure.
Now, and for a reflection on the pretty agonisingly difficult choices being made at the time, I'm joined by the former Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK, Sir David King. Sir David, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The overall narrative, I suppose, around this inquiry is that they overdid it. You guys overdid it in terms of the lockdown. How does that feel for somebody who's trying to look at the science, trying to look at the numbers at the time?
We should never have been in a position of requiring a lockdown of any kind at all. So let me just go back right to the beginning. We here in Britain in 2013, the Public Health England was pushed into the local communities. And then local communities were not funded to accept it. And so there was a big loss of expertise of public health experts in the UK. When the outbreak occurred in China, and we knew about it, and we knew the details of what was happening, and we also knew, for example, in Guangzhou, they had complete control. There were hardly any cases going into hospital in the big province of Guangzhou in China. They were testing people back in February of 2020. Then the outbreak happens in Italy. We did not stop Italians coming into this country, which would be the natural response at that point in time. And then it comes to the UK. Now, the UK had 10 times more cases by the time we get to April than any other country in Europe. The best behaved country in Europe was Greece. Greece immediately sent ships and airplanes out to China to get equipment to put into their hospitals. Before they even had a single case, they were preparing for an outbreak of a very serious kind, because the details were known from China at that time that this was a serious new disease. And so what I'm saying is, what were we doing with the public health experts? We didn't bring them in. We were modelling the epidemic.
And sorry, by we, you're talking about the ministers, the Prime Minister, number 10 at the time. The picture you're painting seems to be a kind of strange, vague heedlessness, followed later by panic. Is that unfair?
Absolutely right. And panic is what happens when you decide, we better lock down. That is a panic issue. When did we bring in testing? We should have immediately introduced testing at a very high level. Anyone showing anything like symptoms should have been tested. I know quite a few people who went down with COVID and were never tested, even though they reported it to their GPs. So the point I'm making is, there was no leadership on this issue whatsoever until it was too late. And by that time, the disease was so rampant in the UK alone in Europe, as rampant as it was, that lockdown became an inevitable way forward. Now, it was... Can I also just say, because this is very frustrating for me, when I was Chief Scientific Advisor, I led a massive operation, international operation, on infectious diseases. And in that, the report was produced 2006, and we said before 2030, it's highly likely that an infectious disease will occur of the kind that happened.
I remember this. There was a kind of plan, there was an expectation that this was going to happen, and yet no preparations were made at all. So
the preparations were made, but they were all undone by the incoming government in 2010.
Absolutely fascinating. Sir David King, thank you very, very much for talking. I find that both chilling and really illuminating. Thank you. Anyway, the government's proposed new national inquiry panel into the grooming gangs seems to be falling apart. 3 survivors of the rape gangs have now quit that, plus the woman who seemed likely to be the chair. Now, is this because even now the establishment is trying to set the agenda and limit the damage? Or are some survivors asking for everything on their terms? The Minister, Jess Phillips, spoke about this earlier in the Commons today.
Look, it would far be it from me to sit here and speculate about where I'd like it to go, but let me tell you, if I had my way and I was the chair of this inquiry, it wouldn't. You would not be surprised. I think that, look, where I live is one of the places that I have grave concerns about, because that is where I worked. That it wouldn't stop me wanting to look there if I was the chair, because it has a...
Greenwood, the head of the Child Abuse Department at Svithalski Solicitors, and he represents victims of the gangs. David, thanks for joining us this evening. Do you get the sense that this entire inquiry process is falling apart now?
I've never really had the sense that this inquiry process or the plan was a credible plan in the first place. It was envisaged when Elon Musk first got into all this back in January, and Yvette Cooper made her announcement that there would be a series of local inquiries to get to the bottom of what happened, and that might expand into even more than just 5 or 6. And then, under pressure, Keir Starmer in June, stepping off a plane in Canada, decided that they would be doing a big statutory inquiry. Now, I don't know how legally they're going to run these local inquiries and a large statutory inquiry, in the sense that statutory inquiries need to take evidence from real live witnesses.
Absolutely.
And there just isn't enough time to be able to get to all those witnesses in a big statutory inquiry. So that's the situation that we have. I don't think it'll get off the ground in the first place.
A daft question, perhaps, David, but I don't see why we couldn't do a proper national inquiry. I mean, why can we not call witnesses? Why can we not have full disclosure, full openness about what went on, and have some kind of really senior, highly regarded, completely neutral, not sat upon central figure at the heart of it? Why can't we do this?
We definitely can. It's just that it will take 4, 5, 6, 7 years to do it. And, you know, if I detect the mood of the country correctly, they won't stand for that.
They won't.
They want this wrapping up in a couple of years.
Well, 2 of the victims have already quit this process. And also, I think, 3 of the victims, one's unnamed, and also, I think, the woman who is likely to be the chair. So do you do something different?
No, I don't think that. I think the legal model needs to be worked out, first of all, so that we're not reliant on a statutory inquiry doing all the low-level stuff.
So that's back to the drawing board, isn't it?
It is a bit. Yeah, it is a bit. But we shouldn't be starting from here, as they say. We should have been starting in January. What really needs to happen is that someone like a retired High Court judge or a retired judge who is guaranteed to be independent should be doing this. You'll remember that there was a lot of discussion about the Grenfell inquiry and who should chair it. And then what happened was that Mr. Justice Moore-Bick came in and he held a series of open meetings where the public, those interested, could come and ask him questions. He confronted them and answered their questions.
That kind of fronting up is what we need in this case as well, in your view?
To build confidence, yes.
Given that you represent so many of the victims, can you tell us a little bit about the mood among them at the moment as they watch this process unravelling? They
deserve respect. They have, the ones that have spoken about this, let's face it, there are thousands that have not dared mention a word of this and live in the shadows. So the ones that have spoken deserve massive respect for speaking out in the first place. Only a very few have decided that they can speak to lawyers or the press or even sit on this panel, so they deserve massive respect and Absolutely. They need to be listened to.
David Greenwood, thank you very much indeed for that. Prince Andrew's days in his Royal Lodge home could be numbered after it was discovered that the disgraced royal has been living in the King's property virtually for free. We will discuss that next, but the time now 6:48.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
It's not being anti-pensioner to say the triple lock has to go, but politicians are so cowardly that the only way they'll do it is if there's an economic crash. Pathetic, isn't it?
Ian Dale on LBC.
So, what's on your to-do list today? Why don't you check if you're eligible for pension credit? It tops up your pension income and also opens up help with heating bills, council tax, and more. Search pension credit on gov.uk or call 0800 99 1234. There's nothing to lose. Check today. Pension credit. Credit where credit's due. Eligibility criteria apply.
Julie could part exchange her car. Or check out We Buy Any Car. She could be unsure if she got a good deal part exchanging. Or have cash in the bank with more bargaining power to get a bigger car for her five-a-side team. Totally played. Or total player. To get a quote in 30 seconds, enter your reg number now at webuyanycar.com.
Train to Chichester. Flasks filled, snacks packed, all ready for Maisie's first stargazing adventure.
Come on, Maisie. Follow everyone up to the top of that hill.
Oh, look, that one's the plough.
Shooting star! Wow!
Made it. Last train back and feeling cosmic. And it seems we have an astronaut in the making. Download the Southern Railway app to book kids' tickets for £2 on off-peak journeys. Southern Railway, where every stop is a story.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:50. Prince Andrew has been living virtually rent-free in Royal Lodge, which is part of the King's huge property empire. Will he be turfed out? And more to the point, just how much damage is this ghastly saga doing to the British monarchy itself? Let's talk now to Tina Brown, former editor of Vanity Fair and the best-selling author of The Palace Papers and also the weekly Substack Fresh Hell. Speaking of which, Tina, where does this end? Do you think it ends with him actually having the title Prince removed as well?
Well, I don't think they can take Prince away because, he's a Prince of the Blood and I think he gets to keep that. I actually do think this is probably never going to stop until they get him out of Royal Lodge. He has got to be, in the old days, he would have been sent to the Tower of London. But in lieu of that, I think there's plenty of nice, rustic, charming cottages on the Balmoral estate. I think he has to be out of the UK, in Scotland. Or perhaps,
speaking as a Scot, Tina, Scotland is part of the UK, but I get your point.
I know.
Far away from most people.
Yes. Well, I'm an American now, so forgive me. But or frankly, banish him to a villa on a Dubai golf course. But I think he's too close. Look, he's 5 miles from the, future forever home of William and Kate. He's a short, neigh, as it were, on his horse from Windsor Castle. It's too close. Windsor is very, very close to London, and you can't. How do you hide? How do you disappear? A 6 foot tall, 190 pound, very healthy, 65-year-old man. You cannot simply, keep him in a box. So that's why I'm in favour of him banishing to Scotland, which the Scots have nothing to. They don't deserve him, but he doesn't deserve them. Yeah. But nonetheless, I think it would be better.
Well, I'm sure if the King had a big enough box, he'd use it. Clearly, he is doing what he can. He's trying to get the other titles away from him and acting. I'm sure he'll act on Royal Lodge next. But in terms of the next generation, William and Kate know that their future as the monarch and the Queen Consort of the UK is dependent upon public support, and Uncle Andrew is just ripping it apart.
It's true, and obviously they thought first time around when he was stripped of everything by the Queen, a lot of things, his honours and his military honours and so on, that he could still attend family occasions. But as we saw with the Duchess of Kent's funeral, suddenly into the picture, like, the jaw shark looms Andrew at the shoulder of William, who is staring, implacably to his, in the other direction. And he can't get him out of the shot, and it becomes this meme. You can't sort of get him out of it unless he's just going to be gone. Now they've said they're not going to have him for Christmas at Sandringham, so he'll be eating his turkey like some kind of, Ebenezer Scrooge, alone at Royal Lodge. But, but it's not going to work. They have to get him literally out of Royal Lodge and into one of the many, many estate cottages that they have.
Now, I know the Democrats in the US are still looking through all the files at the moment. We've got the Giuffre book today. Do you think there's a lot more to come on this in terms of embarrassing emails, embarrassing messages?
The book itself, which is a harrowing read, I must say, doesn't give us anything new about Andrew. What it does do, though, which is bad for Andrew, is it reminds everybody just how depraved and terrible Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell was, and we know how close Andrew was to them. What has obviously completely sort of soiled him yet again is the release of these emails, in which he said, after telling Emily Maitlis in her interview that he'd cut off all, communication with him after he had seen him on that last time. Turns out he didn't. He actually wrote him in his email saying, "Let's play together soon."
We're all in it together. Yeah, a year later. Together. Yes.
So he just lied. It was pants on fire time on that interview, which I think is really bad because it makes you think, well, everything about that interview probably wasn't true. So that was I think the thing that really did him in. The Jufrey book just reminds you what a disgraceful and disgusting kind of entourage this whole was that he was part of. Yeah.
Tina, you and I have seen some extraordinary royal stories in our time, going back to Diana and all of that. And again and again and again, we're told this is the beginning of the end of the British monarchy. And it's never true. Is it any truer this time?
No, it's not. Look, everybody has, some bad seed in the family or some crazy cousin or whatever. So, but I think that Andrew has to be dealt with, let's put it that way, before the coronation of the next monarch. I think it's all very well. We understand he's Charles's brother. It's very difficult, really, for Charles to have to deal with this painful sort of family problem. But by the time we get to William's reign, it has to be dealt with. It's got to be cleaned up. Only because I think the tolerance for the idea that the monarchy can just, have one rule for themselves and one for another is really getting thin. And unfortunately, they're going to have to be pure as the driven snow. And Andrew keeps reminding people of these special favours, this appalling scandal, his corruption. The man's got the worst judgment in the world.
It is.
And of course, Sarah Ferguson, who had just been sort of trying to rehabilitate herself, she also
It's ghastly.
Once again,
it's ghastly. Tina, bless you. Thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it. Thanks. Nicolas Sarkozy, France's Conservative president between 2007 and 2012, begins a 5-year prison term in Paris today. It's for criminal conspiracy to use money from the Libyan dictator Gaddafi to fund his electoral campaign. Let's hear now from Catherine Norris-Trent, the senior correspondent for France 24. Catherine, thanks for joining us. So Nicolas Sarkozy, a very big figure in France and still quite a lot of supporters on the street.
Yeah, that's right. A couple of hundred supporters turned out in the 16th arrondissement of Paris this morning as Nicolas Sarkozy kind of stage managed his departure to jail. His lawyers had organised the date with the court in advance, so he knew when it was going to happen, and he walked down this affluent area of Paris with his wife, Carla Bruni, and his children, and said goodbye to his supporters in front of the cameras. And then he was driven away to the prison de la Santé in southern Paris, which is a pretty notorious prison.
It's old, isn't it? It's an old prison. Yeah.
It's a very old prison, and it's the last one inside the city limits of Paris. Some notorious prisoners have been held there, such as Carlos the Jackal, and he will now be serving some time there. We don't know how much. He could be let out within a month as legal proceedings continue.
And he has been seen with President Macron recently. Is part of this story a kind of growing argument below the surface between the French judiciary, determined to do their thing, and the French political class, who saying he's one of ours in the end, don't go too far?
Well, that's what Nicolas Sarkozy wants to make it about. He put out a statement on social media just ahead of heading into prison and basically said that this was, in his words, revenge, and that it was motivated by hate. And he's really called into question the integrity of the French judicial system, and the fact that he was invited by President Macron to the Élysée Palace on Friday, the fact that the current Justice Minister, of France has said he will go and visit him in prison, is really calling into question, are the politicians clubbing together and trying to blame the judicial system, which some people say is a very, very slippery slope. So you've had judges, trade unions coming forward and saying, you've got to watch out for this, because let's not make this political. They're insisting that this is actually, based on the rule of law, something that Nicolas Sarkozy himself was very strict about when he was in office.
Catherine Norris-Trent, admirably clear and incisive. Thank you so much. Now, if you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on our free Global Player app or the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with all the latest news and opinion. You can put your news categories in the order you'd like them. You can pause, you can rewind live radio, and you can listen to a range of podcasts. Download the all-new official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew.
We can commit to the triple lock. Next April, pensioners get another £470.